Good afternoon, you guys, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel, or welcome to the Prime Vanguard channel. It is I, your host, the creator of the Prime Vanguard channel, Cassius, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about my take on the Magnolia deck for Stoicheia. Now, we are about a month in of Overdress at the time we're recording this deck profile, so it is the month of June, and I'm going to be introducing you my Stoicheia deck and my other deck profiles for the rest of the nations that are going to be featured on this channel. Now, for Magnolia, this is a deck that I personally have been playing and have decided to main as my main nation for the rest of Overdress, except for the other decks that I'll be trying to play test to suit my playstyle. I do enjoy Magnolia a lot. It has great potential, it's got great attacks, it's got a unique playstyle compared to all the other nations that we currently have right now for Overdress. And I've just been enjoying everything on it. I recently just watched Different Fights video on it. It was a really good video. It explained all his choice and decisions very well. But I will say that based off some of the Western and the American and some of the Japanese deck lists that I've seen for the deck, as well as Europe that I've noticed, I do think that all of them are really great, and this is just my simple take on the deck, as there are some places where I think that they're great, but maybe like if you tried it this way or seeing where it's going like with that and so on. Not to say that anybody else's deck profile is wrong or their decision of card ratio and choices are incorrect, but this is simply just my take on the deck profile for the meta that's happening here in America. Alright, you guys, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started right on into the deck profile. Since this is Overdress, I am changing the format of my deck profile. Starting from now on, I'll be introducing my ride deck for the deck first, and then I'll be going through the deck profile throughout, and then ending off with a farewell, and then ending it off differently. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, you guys, so this is currently my ride deck for the deck. I'm playing the Sylvan Horned Beast Chain ride chain for Magnolia. This is the one that came with the trial deck. And so far, I think that this is the best ride chain for my playstyle. Magnolia does require you to have a full board. That's where the deck really shines, and being able to get those full boards to access skills or to generate more attacks for later in the game or when you enter Magnolia is extremely helpful. Charis and Lattice get you more cards for free, and whether or not be a unit on the board, at least generates you more soul, which for a Magnolia player that is a very hard resource to come by, as a lot of our best abilities do require us to use soul. And because Stoicheia doesn't really have too many resource management cards at the moment, whatever resources you have, such as Counterblast and Soul, is very valuable, and you want to make sure that you're using all of those pieces very correctly. So being able to generate as much free resource as we can through the deck is extremely important, and that's why I believe that this ride chain for the way that I built my deck is the way that I'm going to keep it for now. Moving on to our main deck, I play 3 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast King Magnolia. Magnolia is the star of the deck. It's the main grade 3 and the only grade 3 that we play, as we want to make sure that we can see this card so that we can Persona Ride to get off its second ability of allowing all of our back row units to attack for only 1 Counterblast. This generates us about 6 attacks in a turn, and the Persona Riding gives us 10,000 to the front and the extra card draw, meaning that when we Persona Ride this card, our offensive turn and offensive capabilities just skyrocket to a really great number. And even without the front trigger bonus or without any other trigger bonuses, a lot of our other units in the deck have abilities that increase their own power with their own skills, meaning that a lot of our attacks are going to be hitting for good numbers, especially in Overdress where guarding is different because of the 5,000 point shield values. But because we have this power up bonus from Magnolia and the Persona Riding, we really want to make sure that we can see this card as much as possible. Moving on to my grade 2s. Now this is where I think that my deck has differed from very other Magnolia decks, and I'm playing 2 copies of the Tearful Malice Order card. Now, for those of you that do not know what this card does, it is a order card that is a normal order, and it has the following effect. You play this card with the cost of retiring 2 of your rear guards, you draw a card, place this card into the soul, and countercharge. Now, this card, to me, is amazing for Magnolia. I really don't know why a lot of Magnolia players haven't picked up this card yet or put too many of it into the deck, but essentially this is the card that I was talking about. It generates resource management for the deck. It gives you back soul, a draw, and a counter charge. And 2 rear guards for Magnolia isn't really that big a deal, as we do have ways of getting our pieces back from the drop zone onto the field, as we are Stoicheia and we have Grand Blue access. We also have the Charis and Lattice ride line, which gives us 2 units for free. And we just have good different ways of generating board onto the field, and losing 2 rear guards really isn't that big a deal. In the moment, it might hurt, but with all the cards that we have that allow us to just get more resources back, it's really not that much of a negative. And you really do need soul to activate your best skills, and you need counterblast to activate your best skills, and this is just the only form of resource management that this deck has at the moment. So 2 copies of Tearful Malice is something that I am going to keep. I feel as though 1, you don't ever see it, and then more than 2 just feels clunky, so 2 for me is just the perfect number. For my next card, I'm playing 2 copies of Ghost Chase. Now Ghost Chase is a blitz order card, and it has the following effect. Ghost Chase lets you choose one of your units, and it gets 5,000 power until the end of a battle, and then if a unit is not being attacked, you can add that unit back to your hand. Now Ghost Chase is another resource management card. This card allows us to get back one of our rear guards from the field, and a lot of the best Stoicheia abilities activate are on place, which means that we get the chance to reuse those cards for their abilities, as we don't have too many cards that stay on the board and then do something consistently well. Ghost Chase also is a defensive order as I use it, which gives Magnolia 5,000 more power, so I don't have to use as much shield for my hand, and getting back key pieces that, like I said before, we can reuse is extremely good too. Especially against decks that can retire during the battle phase, which there's only one right now, and that's Nirvana, but also if you play against decks that can retire in any other form or manner, that's a good way of getting your important pieces back too. So 2 Ghost Chase at the moment. I feel like 3 is a little too much, and the same thing with 1. Like anything with 1 in this deck that isn't searchable is not, in my opinion, really worth playing that much, unless it's just a card that you want to throw in there as a cool attack. But I see some people playing more than 2. I feel like if you are going to play more than 2, then I'll switch my ride chain to the Ranker chain ride chain, which is where you would ditch the order to draw more cards. But because we're not playing that ride chain, just 2 is enough. Then I play 1 copy of Sylvan Horned Beast Lattice in the main deck. Now Lattice for the ride chain is really good because you need it to get the extra superior call, but in my opinion, just as a unit, take away the ride ability, it's powerful, but because Magnolia has an issue with maintaining soul, as there are soul that you want to use for your other skills, and you do need a soul blast for your ride chain, and other than Tearful Malice, you don't have any form of soul regeneration, you don't get to use this card all the time, and the times that you do see it or see multiple copies of it, it does feel clunky because you are only going to be able to use one of those per 1 battle phase, as you have to give up soul to use other skills, or you don't have any way of getting soul back, which means that any more than maybe like 2 to 3 more copies of Lattice in the main deck feels clunky to me. So I dropped it down to 1 so that I could play more copies of Ghost Chase, and then eventually I just kept it as 1 in the main deck because I already have 1 in my ride chain, and I didn't want to drop anything else that I had, so 1 copy of Lattice is fine for me. The reason why this works out is because since it is a unit card, I do have a way of reviving this card, and because I play it in my ride chain, that gives me 2 in the deck, meaning that I have other ways of getting this card back. So it's not like you don't ever see Lattice, but in the main deck you only want 1. For my next grade 2, I play 4 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Geonosla. Sylvan Horned Beast Geonosla is one of my favorite grade 2s for Magnolia. This is the card that lets you get your power plays through, it makes your other attacks a lot better, and it also helps your Persona ride turn, makes that a lot stronger. Now if you don't know what Geonosla does, he has the effect where in the back row only on the rearguard circle, when he attacks, you counterblast 1 and you take his power and add it onto another unit. Now this is extremely helpful as, like I stated before, with Magnolia, this deck generates a lot of attacks, but the rear guards themselves, while they give themselves power, they're sometimes 1 defensive trigger might slow you down. So having a card like Geonosla, who can help you manipulate power, especially during the battle phase, will throw off your opponent's defensive plans, as Geonosla, his power will fluctuate depending on the effect of Magnolia and triggers and any other effects you activated during the main phase that you use in play. So your opponent will have to consider the power of this card being added onto one of your other units during the battle phase, meaning they have to be more careful with how they guard. Because you might have a rear guard unit that's only 15k, and then they can guard that with a 5k, but add Geonosis maybe 20k power to that 15k, and that becomes 35k, and that will change the way that they have to guard the attack later in the game. So Geonosis is definitely one of my favorite cards. If you wanted to drop this card to add more ghost chases like Different Fight did, I definitely can see that, because you know, you only really want like one or two. A lot of these cards in Magnolia specifically, you really only want to see them like once or two, because once they're on the board, nothing really changes unless you're using cards to get rid of cards, or you need to call cards over cards, which isn't always good, but there are some times you have to do that, or you bounce cards back with Ghost Chase. So once a lot of cards are on the field, nothing really changes. But I play 4 of it because I really do want to see this card. It's how I get my final turns to work, and it's how I win a lot of my games. For my next grade 2, and probably the best grade 2 of the deck, I play 4 copies of Spring Maiden Elenia. Now, Spring Maiden Elenia is our revival grade 2 of the deck. This is the card that I was speaking about that lets us get many of the units that we have in the drop zone back onto the board. She's also one of your Ghost Chase targets, as her ability activates on place. But she does cost a soul, so this is another reason why I had to drop Lattice in the deck, because this is where most of my soul is going. Because once I drop Elenia, that's when I'm going to go ahead and start building board back up and manipulating the position of my units and getting my attacks ready for my battle phase. Elenia lets me target anything that's grade 2 or less, so that's why there's no other grade 3s in this deck besides Magnolia, because I wouldn't be able to target those cards later. But a lot of your best cards right now are grade 2 and lower anyway, so it's not like it really changes anything. And that's just what she does, is she's your revival unit, your best target for Ghost Chase, and she keeps the momentum going with your field if you're playing against a deck that has heavy retire or control. For my last grade 2, I'm playing 4 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Dodger. Sylvan Horned Beast Dodger is your main offensive unit. He has an easy 5k plus, which helps generate numbers when boosted, and he becomes 23k with a boost, which makes him an easy card to attack with. His effect activates in any position that he is on the board, so regardless if he's in the front row or in the back row, you always got a 15k attacker with this card. As getting 4 rear guards is not hard with this deck, as we've seen with a lot of the cards that we play with, so you can always rely on Dodger to give you good numbers during the battle phase with Magnolia. Now I'm going to showcase my grade 1s. So for my grade 1s, I play 2 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Charis in the main deck. Charis is just a generic back row attacker. He's the weaker version of Lattice. He gets additional 5,000 power when he's chosen to attack from the back row, and that effect comes for free as long as he is in the back row, meaning that he's just another card that you can target with for Magnolia's skill for extra attacks if you don't have anything better, or if you just want to use it with something else. There are times where you're not going to always want to choose the strongest unit you have in the back row to attack with. You might want to use as a booster to generate more powerful attacks, because during the battle phase, especially with Magnolia, you have to decide, okay, do I want more attacks or do I want better numbers? Which is why Charis is important to the deck, because you can choose Charis to become an 18k with Magnolia, but still have a column like with Dodger and an 8k booster to make that happen, instead of just doing something different to make an attack happen. So 2 copies of Charis, because we definitely want something that can give us more varieties and options for our battle phase attacks. For my next grade 1, I play 4 copies of Planar Prevent Dragon. Planar Prevent Dragon is the Sentinel for Stoicheia. I really do like the effect that these cards have, especially for Stoicheia in this deck specifically, as this deck doesn't really generate too much hand, because you are using it to get on the board, or you are using it to pay the cost for skills or guard or anything else, etc., that requires your hand, and there isn't too much drawing in this deck that happens. So Planar Prevent Dragon definitely is the better Sentinel for this deck to have. And for my last grade 1, I play 4 copies of Conspiring Mutant Admantis. Conspiring Mutant Admantis has been regarded as one of the best Stoicheia grade 1s, and unfortunately it is. This card on place lets you get 5k to one of your units, and as I've been stating for Magnolia throughout the entire video, numbers are something that is difficult to deal with, especially when you choose to go the route of multiple attacks. So having a card like Admantis, who is another Ghost Chase target, that's very important to note, means that you can bring them to the board and go ahead and give 5k to something to make that attack a lot stronger. It's also a good Handrina target, as this ability happens when on place and not on place from hand, meaning that being able to recur this card multiple times means that a lot of your other attacks are going to be coming a lot stronger when you go to your Magnolia turns. So definitely want 4 copies of this card. You really want to make sure that you can apply as much pressure to the attacks that you have. And this card is really good, especially in the early game, because now that the value of shield has dropped for grade 1s in Overdress, getting that 5,000 power to another unit that you're going to have in your early game means that you can now do grade 1 rushes again, and this card just helps that become more consistent. Now moving on to our triggers. For my over trigger, I am playing the Surge Dragon Deity of Blessings, Blessfavor, and we're even playing it on the Blessfavor mat. So this is the Stoicheia over trigger. This card is an omni trigger, and what that means is that this card does everything. Gives you crit, front, heal, draw. The card did get errata at the time that I am making this video. I believe on the card that it states if your damage zone has more cards than your opponent. It's now is if your damage zone is equal to your opponent, which means that if you and your opponent both have 3 damage, you can go ahead and heal. That is to my knowledge. I don't know if I'm wrong. If I am wrong, go ahead and correct me in the comment section, but to my knowledge, that's what the errata was. It's really good for Magnolia. The Crate Elemental one, while it does help Magnolia generate 2 more powerful attacks, it doesn't do everything that we need it to do. This card pretty much fixes everything with Magnolia when it's pulled, especially offensively. Defensively, over triggers are great as well, as they pretty much shut down your entire opponent's turn. I then, in this deck, am playing 7 critical. I play 3 copies of Abyss Temptation and 4 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Jackalope. 7 crits in this deck is fine because obviously you want to be as offensive as possible. Fronts don't do anything for Magnolia because a lot of your attacks are going to be in the back row as well, and you are doing Persona Ride, so it's like the extra 10k doesn't, it's good, but it doesn't apply the critical offensive pressure that this deck needs. So 7 is just fine because I did want to play more draw triggers in this deck to see my pieces. My next trigger is 4 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Polatter, which is 4 draw triggers. So Magnolia, you do want to see key pieces in the deck. Even though you have Superior Calling, there are other cards that you need to see, and like I said, this deck doesn't have any main forms of drawing besides Tearful Malice, but that requires you to use board. This card is a target for Tearful Malice very often, but seeing a draw trigger offensively and defensively is really good in this deck as well, so we can get to those pieces so that on the next turn after where we Persona Ride, we'll know that we'll be all set to do that. So I'm definitely playing 4 draws right now until I see something for Stoicheia that lets us go through our deck a little bit faster. If I was playing the Ranker Chain lineup, I still would play 4 draw triggers because you just want to be able to go through your deck as fast as you can. But Ranker Chain, I will say, definitely does help with the early game drawing in the deck. And then finally, I'm playing 4 copies of Sylvan Horned Beast Zlatorog, which is our heal trigger of the deck because heal triggers for Stoicheia are amazing. Alright you guys, so that is it for my Magnolia deck profile. My final thoughts on this deck is that I do enjoy Magnolia. I am a Magnolia main, and I think that Magnolia definitely has a lot of potential to grow. This was the first set of Overdress, meaning that a lot of the cards that came out were just to help get people excited into Overdress and just the kickstart of what these different archetypes of decks can do. And Magnolia definitely has the potential to really be a top tier deck out of all the other the other 9 decks that are out. It's just really where this deck is lacking. What it's missing is, I hope that Stoicheia gets a card to help with the resource management, or just Sylvan Horned Beast get a card to help with that. I know that at the time of this video, we did get the final list of Final Brush with Legends, and I've seen some cards that are going to help with that, but still they haven't fixed the main issue of resource management with Magnolia. And in my final thoughts and opinions on this deck, I think that Tearful Malice is a card that a lot of Magnolia players are either going to start paying attention to or hop on with, because you are going to want some form of resource management, as a lot of these other decks that have just gotten support from that newest set that's going to be coming out soon have better resource management. Cardinal Diaz got it. I know that Nirvana got it with the form of their draw 2 card. Zorga has Alchemagic, so it doesn't even have to worry about resource management like Magnolia does. and Bruce just has everything it needs with the soul charging. So every other deck got some form of good resource management versus Magnolia, but once Magnolia does get that resource management card, even that 1 card or 2 cards, this deck will really start to pop off. In the early game, it's a beast. A lot of decks really have a hard time dealing with it, but as far as it is right now, it's just good enough. Well, that's my final thoughts on the deck, you guys. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section below. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. I've definitely got a lot more deck profiles I want to showcase to you guys and tell you more about my thoughts on them. Also, if your friends think about building a Magnolia, do not forget to share this video with them and go ahead and use this deck as a template. So that's all for today, you guys. See ya.